Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Hisoutensoku, aka Touhou Sniper 98. It's been a year since I last made one of these. No, seriously, it's almost been exactly a year since Imperishable Night. And I said in that video that hopefully this one wouldn't take as long. Yeah, good fucking joke, buddy. Anyways, if you're even interested in watching this, you should already know what it's about. If you don't because you weren't around last year when I made the last few videos of this series, Touhou Grand Order is a little video series where I draft Touhou characters as FGO servants, basically. I tried to design these servant profiles so that they're as accurate to the original lore as possible. However, for some areas there may be some headcanon involved instead because the lore just doesn't provide enough detail to make a full profile with. Just keep that in mind whenever something like this pops up. And since these designs are purely fan-made and only meant to be for entertainment and not necessarily with game balance in mind, there's a good chance that these designs are broken as fuck, but that might be a good thing for you if you're a Touhou fanboy. So with all this in mind, let's get started on Phantasmagoria Flower View characters, or the ones who debuted in it, first with Ayaya. Aya is a 5-star caster with a 2Q 2A deck. Her first skill is Wind Manipulation EX, which gives the party one-hit evasion that can't be evade pierced, but Invul Pierce will still go through it. It also produces 10 to 20 stars and increases party MP gen by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Speedster A+++, which gives herself 3-hit evade that also cannot be evade pierced for 5 turns, increases her own MP damage by 10 to 20% for 5 turns, and charges her own MP gauge by 10 to 20%. After 1 turn, she also charges party MP gauges, including her own again, by another 20 to 30%, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. The evades on both her first and second skills stack together, so Aya can give herself a 4-hit evade, but they will not stack with external evade buffs. Her third skill is the Pursuit of Truth B+, which increases her own star gem by 30 to 50% for 3 turns, gives herself gut status once for 3 turns that revives her with between 1000 to 3000 HP, and activates the Pursuit of Truth self buff for 3 turns, which increases her own quick performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns if Aya has any evasion buff active, not just her own, at the time that she uses her third skill. And if her guts gets triggered, it removes the Pursuit of Truth quick buff and replaces it with a 50% quick buff instead for 1 turn, then removes all buffs from the enemy that triggered her guts, all on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her passives are Territory Creation A+, and Shoot the Bullet A, which gives her an innate 25% chance to keep an evade stack even when hit. Her MP is Illusionary Dominance, which is a quick AoE that also gives a one-time 50% MP generation rate buff on hit to everyone on her team that has an evade buff of any kind active, and a 30 to 50% party crit buff for 3 turns as its overcharge. Her Bond CE is the Almanac of Gensokyou, which grants the party a 25% chance to automatically evade any hit even when they have no evade buff active. This does not stack with Aya's Shoot the Bullet passive. FGO currently has no casters with a quick NP, so to me, Aya seemed like the perfect candidate for a quick AoE caster. And since the player base loves their fucking Scotty memes too much, I turned Aya into the perfect Scotty meme too. You can thank me later. Outside of Scotty meming, I designed Aya to be an alternate support caster. What I mean by this is that Aya's job as a support caster isn't to directly buff her team's damage, but instead to overclock how fast they charge their NPs. Aya's biggest physical strength in Touhou is her speed, so I translated that into faster NP charging for both herself and the whole party in gameplay terms. And because a good chunk of how she does that is by generating crit stars, both with her first skill and with her quick AoE NP, she also provides crit damage support with her NP, providing another indirect damage buff to her team. And lastly, she's also an extremely potent survival caster too, because her skills give her a 4-hit evade combined, and they both have short cooldowns at 5 turns. And as if that weren't enough, she's even got her own guts and a unique passive that gives her evade stacks a chance to not get used up if they're hit. As such, I gave her a few effects in her third skill that take advantage of the fact that Aya is supposed to have evade up most of the time in some form, for which I took some inspiration from King Hassan's recent buff that he got in JP. Her biggest weakness is definitely anyone with Invul Pierce, since that'll still go right through her evades, or buff removers that can take her evades and her guts away. But other than that, you can also field Aya as a dedicated quick DPS caster thanks to her own quick buffs, crit buffs, and MP damage buff, which can get out of hand pretty quickly, no pun intended, with the right supports of her own. Next, we have Medicine Melancholy, who's a 3-star assassin with a Lancer deck. Her first skill is Poison Depredation A+, which inflicts poison on all enemies that deals 1000 to 3000 damage per turn for 3 turns, reduces their defense by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and inflicts MP Seal on all enemies for 3 turns on its 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Poison Apotheosis A+, which first inflicts a unique Lily of the Valley debuff on all enemies for 3 turns, that applies a 100% debuff resist debuff that ignores all enemy debuff resists, then inflicts poison on all enemies that deals another 1000 to 3000 damage per turn for 3 turns, and then reduces their attack by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Poison Inundation A+, which multiplies the sum of all currently applied poison buffs, even the ones from her teammates, by a factor of 1 to 3 for 3 turns, applies a unique contamination status on all enemies for 3 turns that negates debuff cleanse effects once per target, and applies buff block for 3 times for 3 turns on all enemies on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Presence Concealment C and Poison Manipulation EX, which renders her immune to any poison debuffs that she might take. Her MP is Confusion into Delirium, which is a utility buster AoE that does no direct damage, but instead inflicts guaranteed poison that ignores enemy debuff resists and deals 3000 to 5000 damage per turn for 3 turns on all enemies, reduces all enemies' quick, arts, and buster resists by 10 to 30% for 3 turns, has a 30 to 50% chance to stun all enemies for 1 turn, and blocks all enemy healing for 3 turns. It also generates 30 to 50 stars for her team as its overcharge. And her Bond C is the Melancholia Beatrice, which gives the party poison immunity and generates 15 stars per turn. Medicine is a doll turned into a yokai with the ability to control poison, so I figured it would make sense for her to be a utility assassin who sabotages enemies and softens them up a lot for the rest of her team to take advantage of. Think of her as a 3-star Matahari, except she also poisons the shit out of the enemy team and also generates stars on top of that with her NP. Obviously, with this much utility, Medicine isn't meant to do much on her own. She really needs her team to do the actual damage for her, and her other big weakness is anyone with straight up debuff immunity or multiple rounds of debuff cleanse, if she's already used up her third skill. But used as a setup assassin, she can obviously be really deadly. This makes sense because lore-wise, Medicine isn't a very experienced yokai since she's still relatively young in yokai terms, but her ability to control poison is still extremely dangerous and can affect everyone to varying degrees. And next, we've got Kazami Yuuka, who is everyone's favorite yokai moe. She's a 5-star berserker with, not surprisingly, a full berserker deck. Her first skill is Flower Manipulation EX, which increases party defense by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, further increases her own defense by 20 to 30% for 1 turn, and generates 20 to 30 stars on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is At the Speed of Light EX, which increases her own star weight by 10,000% for 1 turn, increases her own attack by 30 to 50% for 1 turn, increases her own buster performance by 30 to 50% for 1 turn, and charges her own MP gauge by 20 to 30% on a 5 to 3 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Monster Strength Yokai A+++, which grants herself a unique parry status for 3 times, which reduces damage from any normal face card attack that she takes down to 0. Naturally, this doesn't apply to enemy NPs, but only if they're from proper servants. It also buffs her own defense by another 20 to 30% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Magic Resist EX and Self Refraction EX, which is a unique passive that gives her a 20% chance to double the hit count of any of her face cards, but it does not apply to her MP. Her MP is Archetype Master Spark, which is a single target buster that also increases her own crit damage by 100% for 3 turns and deals extra damage by 150 to 200% if her target is humanoid. Her Bond CE is the Garden of the Sun, which permanently doubles the hit counts of all her face cards except her MP and grants the party 5% charge every turn. Yuuka is a DPS berserker, simple as that. She's designed to hit really hard for 1 turn, pop her defense defense buffs and her parries until her second skill can come back, and then do it all over again. Her Self-Refraction unique passive is a reference to her self-cloning ability that she apparently has, and her anti-humanoid special damage mod is a reference to the fact that she's got the worst possible relationship with humans, at least according to Hiedenaku. She's also got some hefty defensive abilities with her combined 90% defense buff for one turn to ward against enemy NPs, and her 3 parries to deflect normal enemy attacks, so from a gameplay standpoint she should play out like a much more hard-hitting Coup Alter with somewhat less defensive utility, but with the added ability of buffing her own team's defense too. But she's still a berserker in the end, so that, along with anyone with defense pierce, are her 2 major weaknesses, and she doesn't have guts like Coup Alter does to give her a lifeline in case things go south. Which admittedly isn't a lot of the time anyway, since Yuuka probably should have vaporized everyone before she can even get to that point to begin with. Next is Onizuka Komachi, who's a 4-star Lancer with a 2A 2B Saber deck, which is highly unusual for a Lancer. Currently, Kenshin is the only Lancer in the game with this kind of deck. Her first skill is Distance Manipulation EX, which blocks all enemy NP gain for 3 turns, reduces the duration of their buffs by 1 turn, and charges party MP gauges by 10 to 20% on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. The MP gain denial effect will not stop enemies from using their MPs if they happen to get it fully charged before Komachi can use this skill, and the duration reduction effect will get rid of any enemy buff that only lasts for 1 turn. Her second skill is There's Nothing Better Than Slacking A, which removes her own debuffs, recovers her HP by 3,000 to 6,000, and increases her own arts performance by 20 to 30% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her third skill is Departed Spirits Manipulation Ferryman A+, which inflicts the Departing Spirit debuff onto one enemy that lasts for 3 turns, reduces their insta-kill resist by 80 to 100% for 3 turns, reduces their arts resist by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, and increases her own star weight by 500 to 800% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. The Departing Spirit debuff is tagged as a quote buff for the enemies, so enemy debuff resist, debuff immunity, or debuff cleanse can't get rid of it, though you can remove it for them if you really want to, if you use a buff removal right after. Her passives are Magic Resist D and Ferryman of the Sanzu A+, which renders her immune to insta-kill and gives her a 5% chance to insta-kill on any of her attacks. Her NP is Death Sign Scythe of Final Judgment, which is a single target arts that first reduces its target's defense by 30% and removes all their defensive buffs if they still have the Departing Spirit demerit, then deals damage. It also deals extra damage to its target if they're either living or divine, along with a chance to insta-kill them with a 50 to 100% chance. And her Bond C is the Titanic, which grants the party insta-kill immunity and herself a permanent 30% MP damage buff. Komachi is a hybrid DPS Lancer, though she leans a lot more into the DPS category than actual support. Basically, she's a potentially self-sufficient Lancer who's got everything she needs to last for a while, with the one exception of being able to generate her own crit stars to become a crit Lancer on top of it all. So if you want her to be an actual crit Lancer, you'll need to provide her with that star gen support. What sets Komachi apart as a DPS, though, is the fact that her third skill is basically a kill switch. She uses that skill on one enemy that you want to kill as fast as possible, and only Guts can save them if Komachi uses it properly. Probably Komachi's biggest weakness, though, is again enemies with heavy debuff resist or debuff removal / immunity, since Komachi's kit has a lot of debuffs to it, though the fact that Komachi's Departing Spirits debuff is considered a buff to enemies lets you not worry about that as much. And lastly, Shikieiki. She's a 5-star ruler with another standard Saber deck. Her first skill is Black and White EX, which removes all buffs and debuffs from one enemy, increases party's attack by 10 to 20% for 3 turns, and further increases party attack by another 10 to 20% for 3 turns for all good aligned allies on a 7 to 5 turn cooldown. Her second skill is Rod of Remorse A, which has a chance to stun all enemies by 40 to 60% for 1 turn, then further increases that stun chance by 20 to 40% against all evil aligned enemies, increases her own star weight by 300 to 500% for 3 turns, and increases her own crit damage by 30 to 50% for 3 turns on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. And her third skill is Cleanse Crystal Mirror A, which grants her invul for 1 turn, increases her own MP generation rate on hit by 20 to 30% for 3 turns, generates 10 to 20 stars every turn for 3 turns, and removes her own debuffs on an 8 to 6 turn cooldown. Her passives are Magic Resist C and Yamaxanadu EX, which makes her immune to insta-kill and mental debuffs. Her MP is Judgment Trial of the 10 Kings, which is an art self-utility MP that taunts enemies for 1 turn, reduces her damage taken by 2,000 to 5,000 for 3 turns, increases her own crit damage by 50 to 100% for 3 turns, and increases her own Buster, Arts, and Quick Performances by 30 to 50% for 3 turns. It also increases her own special attack by 50 to 100% against evil aligned enemies for 3 turns as its overcharge effect. If Komachi's on the same team, however, it reduces Komachi's HP by 2,000, which can't kill her though, and further increases Komachi's Buster, Arts, and Quick Performances by 20% for 3 turns. Her Bond CE is Fate of 60 Years, which increases the party's Buster, Arts, and Quick Performances by 10%, and the attack of all friendly, good aligned servants by 20%. Eiki's kit should look very familiar to you. A lot of it was based on Mothman's kit, especially her MP. But due to her lore as a judge of hell who warns people not to sin so that they don't burn in hell, I gave her a solid chunk of support utility that both buffs good allies and debuffs evil enemies. Think of her as Mothman who also buffs his team and is really good at beating the shit out of evil servants, and that's basically Eiki in a nutshell. And that's it for this video. A noticeably shorter one compared to the other Touhou Grand Order videos, since there are less new characters with Phantasmagoria Flower View, and I didn't bother making extra variations of servants this time around. Next up will be Mountain of Faith and Scarlet Weather Rhapsody together, since SWR only has 2 new characters, which don't really warrant a video all by themselves, so I'll be tossing them in with the Mountain of Faith crew instead. Thanks for watching, and until next time, whenever that'll be, deuces.